Beneath the surface of the ocean, where sunlight dies and silence reigns, lies a wreck that refuses to rest. Most shipwrecks are forgotten, swallowed by rust, coral, and time. But this one lingers in a way that unsettles even the most rational mind. They say that if you tune your radio just right, late at night, you might catch more than static. A faint voice, a broken code, or the echo of a distress call that should have ended decades. The idea is simple yet terrifying. A shipwreck that still speaks, sending signals from a grave it should never escape. Are these merely atmospheric tricks or something far stranger? Tonight, we follow the thread of those transmissions, drifting deeper into the story of a vessel built on hope, lost to tragedy, and remembered not by silence, but by the voice it never stopped sending. It began not with tragedy, but with triumph. At the edge of a bustling shipyard, where iron rang against iron and smoke curled into the sky, men labored day and night to bring a vision to life. The vessel was to be a marvel of its age, sleek, powerful, and brimming with confidence that belonged to an era intoxicated with progress. To those who built it, this ship was not just wood, steel, and rivets. It was proof that humanity could tame the sea, bend it into submission, and carve a path across waters that had claimed countless lives before. Every plate fastened, every beam set in place, carried with it a whisper of pride, as though the ship itself was born under a banner of destiny. When it slid into the water for the first time, crowds gathered in awe. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders, flags waved, and the air pulsed with celebration. Champagne smashed against the hull, and cheers rolled like waves across the harbor. The ship gleamed beneath the sun, an image of promise. To those watching, it seemed untouchable, destined for glory, a vessel that would carry not only cargo or passengers, but the weight of dreams. But beneath that brilliance, the sea waited. Its silence was patient, almost mocking. For every vessel launched with hope, there were countless wrecks rotting in the depths, a reminder that the ocean accepts triumph only on its own term. Even as the ship sailed from the harbor for its early test, some swore they felt a chill when the shadow of its hull touched the water. Sailors whispered that no matter how mighty, no vessel leaves port without also courting fate. Still, optimism drowned out caution. The ship's design was hailed in newspapers, praised as modern engineering at its finest. Admirals and businessmen alike toasted its future. There was talk of voyages that would carry it to distant land, of fortunes to be made, and records to be broken. The world looked upon it as an emblem of certainty in an uncertain age. And yet, woven quietly into its story were threads of unease. A small accident during construction, dismissed as trivial. A worker's fatal fall spoken of only in hushed tone. A storm that delayed its completion and seemed to leave streaks of salt etched deep into its frame. No one wanted to see omens where celebration reigned, but history, looking back, has a cruel way of highlighting the details that once seemed inconsequential. That ship, gleaming on its launch day, carried within it the weight of both ambition and inevitability. The applause of its birth would one day echo against the silence of the sea. And as its maiden voyages began, no one could know that the very waters it defied so proudly would soon become the keeper of its voice, a voice that would continue long after the vessel itself was gone. The day the ship left for its final voyage began with deceptive calm. The harbor was still, the air salted but soft, and gulls wheeled lazily in the sky as if nothing could go wrong. On deck, sailors moved with steady rhythm, their boots clattering against the planks, ropes groaning as sails unfurled, and engines humming with mechanical pride. To the casual eye, it was routine, another departure, another promise of safe return. Yet for those who looked closer, there was something different that morning. The sea's surface shimmered in a way that felt watchful, as though it knew what no man aboard could guess. The first days at sea were marked by order and familiarity. Meals served at dawn and dusk, the clinking of cutlery in the galley, laughter breaking through long hours of labor. The captain walked the deck with a firm step, his presence a pillar of confidence. Yet in the radio room, operators frowned at their equipment. The signals crackled oddly, skipping in and out, as if someone or something was speaking beneath the static. They dismissed it as interference, a common enough occurrence, but the unease lingered, carried silently from one watchman to another. By the third night, the weather began to shift. The horizon darkened earlier than expected, clouds sliding across the sky like a curtain. Winds rose, steady at first, then sharp, pulling at rigging and rattling shutters. In the crew's quarters, whispers of bad luck floated. A broken compass here, a sudden chill there. One sailor swore he heard footsteps in the cargo hold when no one was below. Another insisted the radio hissed a voice, just a single word, but when asked to repeat it, he fell silent. On the fourth day, the storm arrived in full. The sea heaved violently, throwing the ship up and down like a toy in a child's hand. Waves struck the hull with deafening force, sending sprays of salt water crashing over the deck. The men worked feverishly, hands raw from ropes, eyes burning with salt. The captain barked orders, his voice swallowed by the howl of wind. In the radio room, the operators tried desperately to send a distress signal, but the equipment fought against them, every word broken, every call fading into static. Yet through the interference, something else pulsed. A pattern, a voice. Not theirs, not human, or so they thought. The chaos only grew. A mast snapped, crashing down with a thunderous crack. A fire broke out near the engine, quickly smothered by seawater rushing through a torn seam. The ship groaned under the pressure, its steel bending, rivets shrieking like cries in the dark. Men shouted prayers. Some clung to debris, others stared wide-eyed into the storm as if transfixed. The captain remained at the wheel until the last, his hands locked to it, refusing to let go even as the sea claimed the deck around him. Then came the moment of silence, terrible in its finality. A sound deeper than thunder, a splitting roar as the ship's hull gave way. Darkness swallowed the vessel whole, dragging it beneath the wave. Screams vanished, the storm rolled on, and all that remained was the indifferent churn of the sea. Hours later, the storm subsided. The horizon cleared, the stars reappeared, and the ocean was calm once more. To the world above, it seemed the ship had been erased without a trace. But far below, in the black stillness of the seabed, it lingered, silent in body, yet not entirely gone. For in the days that followed, radios across the coast would carry whispers from the deep, as though the ship had not finished its voyage after all. For a time, the sea told no story. The wreck was assumed lost, its crew swallowed, its voyage ended. Families mourned, villages held vigil, and the harbour carried on with new departures. Yet, as weeks turned to months, something uncanny began to ripple through the silence. Radios, those familiar companions of sailors and night watchers, started to behave in ways no one could explain. It began with faint static. Ordinary at first, the soft hiss of invisible waves drifting through the night. But then came patterns, bursts of sound that rose and fell with an odd rhythm, as though someone were tapping from very far away. In fishing huts along the coast, old men leaned closer to their crackling sets, brows furrowed. Some swore they heard Morse code, broken but deliberate, distress signals that matched the ship's call sign. Others reported voices, not clear, not steady, but trembling through the static, as if submerged beneath water. A single word, repeated again and again. Sometimes it was the name of a port, sometimes a plea, help. Those who listened described a coldness crawling over their skin, the hair on their arms lifting as though the voices were not only in the air, but inside their homes. The stories spread quickly. Sailors out at sea claimed their radios picked up signals long past midnight, eerie tones rising from nowhere. A fisherman near the cliffs said he woke to the sound of weeping on his receiver, so real he thought someone was standing outside his door. In a lighthouse station, The keeper's log described 3 nights of identical transmissions, a string of numbers always ending in silence. Fear bled into fascination. Amateur radio operators began staying up late, tuning their dials in hopes of catching the phantom broadcast. Some laughed it off as atmospheric trickery, a coincidence of storms and signals bouncing across the ionosphere. But others could not shake the sense that the lost ship was still speaking, clawing its way back through static to the world it had left behind. For those who claimed to hear it, the experience was never casual. One operator confessed he turned off his set after hearing what he thought was a child's voice calling his name. Another said the sound made him ill, his stomach twisting with nausea, even after the signal had faded. There was something unnatural in the cadence, something that felt less like technology and more like memory refusing to die. By now, whispers of the phenomenon had reached the authorities. Journalists began asking questions. Navy officials discreetly dispatched men to trace the source, suspecting foreign interference or a hoax. Yet each attempt to pin the signals down ended in frustration. The transmissions were fleeting, inconsistent, like shadows that vanished when chased.
Still, the Akune.
The wreck may have sunk, but silence never truly followed. In its place came echoes, fractured and restless, haunting the airwaves with reminders that the ocean never gives up its secrets so easily. And so the stage was set for those who would hunt the signals, determined to find truth in the static. The mystery might have lingered as little more than rumor, if not for the persistence of those who refused to look away. Across the coast and far inland, amateur radio operators became the first true hunters of the phantom transmissions. These were men accustomed to the strange quirks of the airwave, hobbyists who knew the difference between harmless interference and something more deliberate. Night after night they sat in dimly lit rooms, headphones pressed tight, notebooks open, pens poised. The glow of their dials painted their faces in pale green as they leaned into the static, waiting. For some, it was nothing, just atmospheric noise bouncing between storms, a puzzle solved with a shrug. But for others, the sounds were undeniable. Strings of Morse code too precise to be accidental, voices layered faintly beneath the hiss, distorted but human. Reports trickled out in ham radio circles, in letters to newspapers, in hushed conversations at docksides. Patterns began to form. Journalists seized on the story, their headlines walking the line between skepticism and sensationalism. Phantom ship calls through the night, read one. Another claim, lost vessel's last word, still echo on the wave. Articles brought curiosity seekers to the radios, fueling both excitement and unease. Yet for all the speculation, the signals refused to reveal themselves on command. They came and went like ghosts, elusive and unpredictable, appearing only to those patient enough to listen for hours in the dark. Meanwhile, the authorities moved with quiet caution. Naval officers received reports but answered with clipped statements about routine interference. Still behind closed doors, investigations stirred. Military operators recorded fragments of signals, their logbooks filled with notes of brief contacts that slipped away as soon as they were noticed. No official explanation followed, but whispers spread among sailors who knew the sea too well to laugh it off. The image of these nights is haunting, a dozen radios humming in unison, their static swelling and collapsing like the breath of some unseen creature. Operators tapping their pencils against desks, scribbling down partial codes, listening to voices that seemed both impossibly near and impossibly distant. The atmosphere was heavy, not with excitement, but with the slow realization that the past might not have been buried after all. Then came the discovery that changed everything. One operator, comparing notes with others across the region, realized the times and frequencies aligned in a pattern. Each strange signal, no matter where it was caught, pointed back to the same rough set of coordinates, the resting place of the lost ship. What had once been a rumor was now tethered to a place on the map, a grave beneath the waves, still speaking to the living. It was no longer a question of whether the signals existed, but why. And as the hunters pressed deeper into the mystery, theories began to emerge, some grounded in science, others reaching into shadows best left undisturbed. When the signals could no longer be brushed aside as chance or imagination, explanations began to take shape. Some were rational, rooted in science, while others strayed into darker, stranger territory. What united them all was an uneasy admission something impossible was happening. The first theory came from the practical minds of radio engineers. They argued the signals were nothing more than atmospheric bounce, radio waves ricocheting off the ionosphere, carrying echoes from distant stations. Under the right conditions, transmissions from halfway across the world could masquerade as local, and distortions could mimic patterns like Morse code. To these skeptics, the mystery was just weather disguised as wonder. But if that were true, why did the transmission so often repeat the lost ship's distress call down to the exact sequence? Why did so many accounts describe voices, names, and pleas that aligned too closely with the ship's final voyage? Others pointed to hoaxes. Perhaps ambitious operators or journalists were fanning the flames for attention, manipulating receivers, or replaying recordings of distress signals. The world has never been short of tricksters eager to turn fear into fame. And yet, the scattered nature of the reports made that explanation falter. The signals were reported across ocean by individuals with no connection to one another, their testimonies eerily consistent. Then came the stranger proposals. Some believed the wreck itself had become a transmitter, its broken radio equipment somehow kept alive by saltwater currents or magnetic anomalies. To them, the ocean floor was not a grave, but a machine, repeating the last desperate messages of its crew like a record stuck on its final groove. Scientists dismissed the idea, but the image lingered, a ghostly vessel pulsing faint signals from beneath the waves. Superstition took the theories further still. Sailors spoke of dead ships that never stopped calling, vessels doomed to repeat their final cries for eternity. Folklore mixed with fact, giving the signals a life beyond reason. Some whispered the ship had not only sunk, but crossed a boundary. That what returned through the static was not a message, but the echo of spirits unwilling to rest. In small villages, these whispers carried power. Fishermen claimed that those who tuned in too often brought bad luck upon their families. Radio enthusiasts described feeling watched, as if the signals were aware of being heard. One man said he dreamed of drowning each night after listening, the hiss of static filling his lungs. Another reported seeing the outline of the ship's hull on the horizon when he followed the frequency to see a black shape that vanished when he blinked. The authorities remained silent. Naval reports marked the signals but left conclusions blank. Journalists pressed for answers but found doors closed. This vacuum of official explanation only deepened speculation. What science could not confirm, rumor eagerly filled. And what rumor could not explain, imagination made terrifying. Still a pattern held steady through all the theories. Whether one believed in physics, fraud, or phantoms, the signals always circled back to the same place, the coordinates of the wreck. The ocean, vast and merciless, seemed to allow no other explanation. Theories might have offered comfort to those who clung to reason, but the weight of coincidence pressed too heavily, and so the impossible lingered. The ship was gone, yet it called. The voices were silenced, yet they spoke. Each theory only seemed to feed the mystery further, leaving listeners caught between skepticism and dread. For every rational mind insisting on natural causes, another was convinced they had brushed against something beyond human understanding. What remained was the feeling, a sensation that science could not soothe nor superstition fully explain. A haunting presence within the static, a message that refused to fade. And for those who pursued the signals, obsession would soon come with a price. At first, the signals were a curiosity, a mystery whispered about in newspaper columns and among hobbyists at late-night gatherings. But over time, they became something darker. Those who lingered too long in the static began to notice changes, not only in their radios, but in themselves. It was as if the frequency carried more than sound. Some listeners reported an unshakable obsession. They would sit for hours, headphones pressed to their ears, scribbling down fragments of Morse code or garbled voices. Families complained that husbands, fathers, even sons would vanish into their radio rooms, emerging pale and restless, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. "It feels like the sea is talking to me," one operator confessed, before abandoning his equipment altogether.
And I can't stop listening. Accidents.
A fisherman traced the source of a signal offshore, convinced he could locate the wreck. His boat was later found capsized, nets drifting empty in the waves. Another listener swore he could hear coordinates within the static. He set out alone to investigate but never returned. Stories spread of ships adjusting their course to follow the phantom frequency, only to vanish into storms or run aground on jagged reefs. Even those on land weren't spared. One lighthouse keeper noted in his log that the signal grew louder each night. By the third week, he claimed it wasn't coming from his radio at all, but from the very walls of the tower. The log ended abruptly. When a relief crew arrived, the lighthouse was empty, the lantern extinguished, and the keeper gone. Psychologists of the time offered explanation. They said prolonged exposure to static could trigger hallucinations, that the human mind was prone to finding patterns where none existed. But sailors and villagers believed otherwise. They spoke of the wreck as cursed, its voice carrying not just through wires, but through memory itself. To them, the ship's cries weren't just signals, they were invitation. And those who answered, even by listening, risked being pulled under. Folklore wrapped around the phenomenon like seaweed. Old superstitions resurfaced, that the ocean demands payment for every life lost, that its ghosts must be heard before they can rest. Parents warned children not to play with radios after dark. Some communities refused to fish on nights when the signals were strongest, fearing they would haul up something they were never meant to see. And yet, fascination never died. The very danger seemed to fuel it. Journalists dubbed the frequency the siren's call of steel and static. Enthusiasts passed recordings from hand to hand, replaying the warped signals as though daring one another to listen longer than the rest. It was no longer just a mystery, it was a test of will, of courage, of how close one could stand to the edge of something unknowable without falling. For the cautious, the signals became a warning. For the reckless, a challenge. But for all, one truth gnawed at the edges of reason. The wreck was not silent.
It reached out again and again, dragging the curious into it.
And each time the cost seemed to grow heavier. What was once dismissed as coincidence now looked like consequence. The frequency had teeth, and those who followed it too closely learned that the ocean never speaks without demand. Decades have passed since the ship vanished beneath the waves, yet the signals have not disappeared. If anything, they've grown stranger, more persistent, slipping into the cracks of modern technology where no explanation quite fits. What began as whispers on crackling radios has bled into the present day, echoing in unexpected places. Amateur radio operators still claim to pick up fragments, distress calls, bursts of Morse code, a faint voice repeating words long forgotten. Some of these recordings have found their way online, fueling endless debate. Are they fabrications, clever edits designed to frighten? Or are they proof that the wreck still calls from the deep? The arguments spiral endlessly, but the recordings themselves remain chilling. Even skeptics admit that the sound has a quality unlike ordinary static, as though it carries weight, like breath against the microphone of time, and the phenomenon is no longer confined to radio. In recent years, stories have surfaced of fishermen hearing voices through ship intercoms that were turned off, or trawlers detecting phantom transmissions on frequencies no longer in use. One coastal guard patrol reported receiving a distress signal that matched the lost ship's call sign, despite the channel being officially retired decades ago. When traced, the signal pointed directly to the coordinates of the wreck. Technology may have advanced, but the mystery has only deepened. Digital receivers, satellite, and advanced monitoring systems have all, at some point, picked up unexplained anomalies near the site. Engineers comb through the data, insisting there must be interference or equipment. Yet again and again the conclusion is the same. Nothing tangible explains it. The signal simply exists, arriving without source, vanishing without trace. For those who hear it firsthand, the experience is unsettling. A hobbyist in Germany claimed the signal came through his speakers in the middle of a storm, though he hadn't touched his radio in weeks. Another listener described waking to a faint, rhythmic tapping in his headphone, Morse code that spelled the ship's name. He unplugged everything, but the sound continued until he fled the room. What disturbs many is not just the persistence of the signals, but their timing. They seem to emerge during storm, in the dead of night, or on anniversaries of the ship's sinking, as though the wreck itself chooses when to be heard, pulling the living into its orbit. Skeptics still dismiss it as a myth carried into the digital age, a ghost story surviving on rumor. But those who have experienced it, those who have heard the wreck's voice themselves, speak differently. They say the signal has not weakened. If anything, it has grown clearer, as though whatever lies beneath the waves is finding new ways to speak. The ocean may have claimed the ship, but silence has never followed. Instead, its voice continues, slipping through wires and airwaves, refusing to be buried. And with each transmission, the line between legend and reality grows thinner. Over time, the ship's story ceased to be only a tragedy or a puzzle of science.
It seeped into the language of folklore, becoming something larger, something whispered about in taverns, on docks, and in the quiet of coastal homes.
The wreck that was still called was no longer just a vessel. It had become a character in its own legend. Locals told stories of a ship doomed by arrogance, its builders blind to the warnings of the sea. They said the voices heard in the static were not echoes at all, but the restless crew, trapped in an endless cycle of their last desperate hours. Children grew up hearing that if you stayed awake too late and tuned a radio just right, you could invite the dead into your home. Some laughed, some tested it, but many swore the chill of the signal was real. Sailors carried the tale across oceans, weaving it into their own superstition. To some, it became a cautionary fable. Respect the sea, or you too will be dragged into its depths, your voice added to the endless static. To others, it was proof of something far stranger, that the ocean does not forget, and that memory itself can linger in the deep like a bruise. In coastal towns, the wreck's anniversary became a kind of unspoken day of mourning. Radios were turned off, fishing boats stayed docked, and old men stared at the horizon as if expecting a shadow to rise. Folklore is rarely precise, but the emotions it stirs are powerful. Fear, respect, and fascination all mingled until no one could say where fact ended and legend began, and yet the story never died out. If anything, it grew stronger with each retelling. Journalists chasing the mystery added their own embellishment. Novelists borrowed details, turning the phantom signals into symbols of obsession and grief. Even scientists, skeptical as they were, could not resist the pull of the narrative, the thought that some mysteries refused to be buried. No matter how deep the water, what makes the tale endure is not just the ship or the signals, but what they represent. To hear a voice that should be impossible is to be reminded of how fragile the line is between the living and the lost. For some, the wreck is a story of hubris and consequence. For others, it is evidence that the past can claw its way into the present. Folklore thrives where certainty fails, and in this case, certainty has never come. The signals continue, the legends deepen, and fear lingers. Whether truth or tale, the ship has anchored itself into cultural memory. And as the years pass, the story grows not weaker but stronger, as if the wreck itself is feeding the legend, determined that it will never be forgotten. The ocean holds countless wrecks, each swallowed in silence, each left to rust in the dark. But this ship is different. Its body may be broken, its crew long gone, yet its voice endures. Across decades, across borders, through storms and still nights, the signal continues to pulse, a reminder that some endings never settle into quiet. Perhaps it is nothing more than coincidence, a trick of weather and wires. Perhaps the signals are echoes of a world that refuses to let go. Or perhaps something deeper stirs beneath the waves, a presence that will not be silent. The truth, like the sea itself, remains unfathomable. And it is that uncertainty that unsettles us most, because if a ship can sink and still be heard, What else waits below, whispering through static, waiting to be noticed? How many other voices linger unheard just beyond the edge of our perception? What began as a tragedy has become a story that refuses to die, a tale of ambition, loss, obsession, and the fragile line between the natural and the impossible. Even now, if you turn your radio late at night, you may find more than music, more than static. You may catch the faintest echo of a vessel calling from its grave, and when you hear it, you'll realize the truth. Silence is never absolute. The past has its ways of reaching forward, and some signals never fade. They drift endlessly, searching for ears to hear them, hearts to fear them, and minds to wonder. The wreck may be gone, but its story is not. It waits in the static, in the hiss of midnight airwaves, carrying its eternal message across time and tide. And if you listen closely enough, you might just hear it, proof that some voyages never truly end.